Hey there, welcome back to Beacon in the Storm. I'm your host, Dr. Bradford Carlton. Today, I have a very special guest with us. I have Donna Laframboise, who's a journalist and author of the book, The Princess at the Window. Hey there, Donna, how's it going today?
I'm well. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. I'm super honored to have you on today. It has been a little bit of a journey to get you on the show. You've been incredibly busy running around, so thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, absolutely my pleasure.
All right. So you and I, just before we hit record, you kind of learned a little bit about me, my background, a little bit about the purpose of my show. And so I like to start the show with what I consider a simple question. And I've asked men and women and political leaders, business leaders. I've asked simple, stay-at-home mothers this as well. I've asked everybody this question. So I'm going to ask you just the same. What does it mean to be a man?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think it means many things to many people, but you know, um, motherhood is very connected to women's identity. Although I myself am not a mother, I recognize that very close connection, and so fatherhood, I think, is very closely connected to male identity. Although everyone does not choose to become a father, we're part of what comes after us, and we can, there are many ways to nurture people, and the roles that men and women play in society tend to manifest themselves. Pardon me, I'm starting to sound like Kamala Harris here. Men and women tend to raise the next generation or encourage the next generation in different ways. They have different styles of that, and both are necessary, and both are very important. So geez, I wasn't expecting. It's sort of like, what does it mean to be a man? I have a great admiration for men, and I feel, as someone who many years ago took a degree in women's studies and focused on women, women, women. It was only later I stepped back and said, well, but what about all these things that men are dealing with and that we don't necessarily even recognize and we don't talk about? And yet these guys get up every morning and they go out and they earn a paycheck and they raise a family and they take care of their parents and their siblings, and they make these marvelous contributions to the community. And a lot of the time they just get shit on by society. I as a I still call myself a feminist, despite all of
Mhm.
the terrible things that are done in feminism's name. But I'm a feminist who admires men.
Wonderful. I'll admit that I believe I'm a feminist as well, and I have since I was young because I believe the goal is supposed to be egalitarianism, right? We're supposed to be equal. And so that's a lofty endeavor, it's a lofty goal. I'm right there with you, though. I don't see it. Like, I don't see the movement necessarily really pushing for it. Um,
No. So pardon me. So when I sort of wrote a book almost 30 years ago now called The Princess at the Window, and I talked about that, and I said, okay, wait a minute. We want equality for women, and we want little girls to grow up to be, anything they can be. We don't want these arbitrary and artificial restrictions, but what about the guys? And what's standing in their way, and let's talk about that. um, and it wasn't a message that anyone wanted to hear 20 some years ago, and it's still not a message people want to hear today, and that's very mystifying to me.
okay, Donna, would you mind giving us a little bit about your background and kind of what you've been doing the past 30 plus years, and that kind of led you down this path and to make that realization today as well as you did 30 years ago?
Well, as I say, I'm from a working class background, and so when I went to journalism school, one of the first things that happened was a guest lecturer asked us as a class, "How many of you are from the working class?" And out of a class of 30 or 35 people, two of us raised our hands.
Wow.
So we, so you know, I bring a perspective to journalism that is actually a very minority perspective. And perhaps it's because, it's in working class life that you see the hard work and the sacrifices that men make.
Mm.
That was just part of my life. My father was an auto mechanic. He got up every morning and he went to work, and he
Mhm.
worked really hard with his physical body, and he got injured, and that kind of work, I have a huge respect for it because I can't do it. So I brought this working class perspective to journalism, and a working class perspective is in some ways just another way of saying a concern about ordinary people, just ordinary people out there, not um, the folks at the top of the pyramid, and not the
Mhm.
folks that have the megaphone in the media to express their perspective on the world, but just ordinary people living their lives. So I've always been concerned about how rhetoric in the women's movement fails to reflect the ordinary lives that people live. So I started there, and I've always been a bit of a dissident journalist because I have absolutely no interest whatsoever in telling people something that they've heard already a million times. We want to talk about women's shelters and how they're rescuing women from violence. That's We all know that story. Well, what about the story that some of the people who operate women's shelters are maybe poisoning the atmosphere with their extreme analysis and their extreme rhetoric? How about we talk about that, because that's important too. If we want to give shelter to vulnerable women, let's not have all that other political stuff um, interfering with that, with the wonderful thing that's going on. So I've always been the journalist who said, okay, yes, but let's talk about this other stuff too. Let's expand our knowledge of the real world, rather than, X group is good and Y group is bad, and it's all very boring, and it's all very predictable, and it's never been something that I was interested in spending my time on as a journalist.
Okay, so you're the Upton Sinclair of focusing on men's issues then.
Perhaps.
It's a jungle out there, I tell you.
So, 20 some years ago, almost, I think it's about 28 since my book came out. Back then I was saying, North American feminism is giving female equality a bad name. It's extremist, it's self-obsessed, it's arrogant, it's intolerant. And all of those things that I was saying nearly 30 years ago about feminism kind of are still true today. And it's a bit distressing. It actually really is.
Uh, it is a bit distressing. As I found out, before we started, I told you I've only been in this for a few months, and the more I learn about it, the more kind of disgusted I am by kind of the obfuscation and the hypocrisy that's going on. But Donna, I'd love to know, like, what insights have you learned through the years? Like, I'll sometimes ask guests, do men have issues? Like, have you discovered any that men have?
Well, men have tons of issues, as those of us who are a little bit aware know, men are at dramatically bigger risk of committing suicide than women are. We always hear about the attempts that
Mhm.
teenage girls make at suicide, and that's important. But it's also important that the boys are killing themselves a couple times more frequently than the girls are. Like, it is a big, huge problem, and we don't hear about it. And we don't hear about the fact that most industrial accidents involve men, both the ones that kill them and the ones that are, injure them and change their lives because the injuries are so significant. We don't hear about the mental health crisis that lead to men, becoming homeless. Vast majority of the homeless are men. All of those incredible markers that are just right in front of our face, and we don't even see them, and we don't talk about them. And if we really were interested in being a compassionate society, there is no excuse for not paying attention to the potential problems that our sons are going to face, along with the challenges that our daughters face.
Certainly. So, if I may be slightly contrarian for a moment, Donna, I browse feminist forums, and I they those issues are addressed, but it often comes down to, well, it's personal responsibility. These men need to take care of themselves. They need to understand that that's the patriarchy putting them down. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh my goodness. Well, if men should just take care of themselves and it's not an issue that anyone else should be concerned about, then equality would demand that we have exactly the same response to women. Well, you
Mhm.
should just take care of yourself and take responsibility for your own lives and stop complaining and stop whining. And of course, we would never say that to women. So why would we dream of thinking that it's an adequate and appropriate response to men raising their own concerns? It's heartless,
Mhm.
and so um, yeah. So I don't have any patience with it, and the patriarchy analysis sounded interesting and compelling when I was in my 20s, and when several decades have gone by since then, and it just sounds like nonsense. Sounds like nonsense to me. If you actually believe that men are controlling the world, you're just not looking at the real world. That's my view now.
Okay. Where do we go from here? Like, if between it's I'm talking to you, this sounds so reasonable. I talked to my other guests, it sounds so reasonable. But then you go out into public or you go online and you get so much anger and so much hate. How can we have this conversation in a rational way when no one wants to have it?
That is a good question, and I think I've realized, especially the last few years through what we've gone through with COVID, is that we are humans are have find it difficult to have their views challenged,
Mm.
and the first response is anger. And I love ideas. I love exploring new ideas, and I love reading a book that changes my view of the world. It excites me, but I realized that maybe that's not a perspective that's shared by everyone. And in fact, people, yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult to change people's minds about all sorts of things. Um, and I think, just kindness and persistence and being pleasant about, perhaps, raising challenges to ingrained perception. I'm not sure. I don't pretend to have the answer.
That's right.
I've been trying to have reasonable and kind and humane discussions about many controversial things, and it is tough. It's very difficult.
Okay. Let me ask, in your career, have you seen any headway? Has anything changed for the better for men, or is it just been kind of under the radar the whole time?
I'm not sure that it has changed very much, and that is a dreadful thing to have to admit. When I was one of the first people who was hired by the National Post in around just before the year 2000. Canada had a brand new newspaper launch, which was totally against the grain because that was at the time when newspapers were starting to fail. And here we had a brand new newspaper in Canada, and it was very exciting for the first few years. And we were told to be politically incorrect, and we were told to be irreverent, and so I did a bunch of writing then about divorced fathers and how,
Mm.
there was a systemic bias in the court system against divorced fathers, and how, that they faced custody
Mhm.
inequality, and how they were sometimes falsely accused of abuse because horrible, immoral women would use that as a tactic in
Mhm.
divorce trials, or in divorce hearings, at court, custody battles. It was bad then, and I'm not sure that it's actually improved much in a few decades. And that's just that's distressing and discouraging.
So, do you think I'm wasting my time then? Should I?
No, not at all. No, for goodness sake, no, we must keep on. And societal ideas, views, prejudices, they take a while to dislodge. They take a generation or two. When you go back and you look at the fight against slavery, that took a couple generations. There were all of these people advocating for that for a long time. And many of the people who did really amazing and important spade work didn't even live to see the victory, but it was a victory that was accomplished. Entire societies changed their views on slavery. So it's what's right. It's important to keep pushing, but in our puny lifespans, we may not see much progress. But I think we just have to keep going and not be discouraged.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, I'm glad I should keep going. um, who do we talk to? You said there are these prejudices that they're embedded. Is it embedded in the men? Is it like we're just meant to be this way because we're training our boys to be this way? Is it our women who have expectations of men? Is it really the patriarchy kind of back behind everything? You don't believe in the patriarchy. I hear you, but
No, I don't believe in the patriarchy. I think it's we live in the context of a larger society. So unfortunately these days, I think a big problem is the school system. And that is different from when my generation grew up. I remember being complaining bitterly in maybe it was grade 10 or 11 that we had this reading list of books in English class, and not a single we seem to have this a slate of books. And Lord of the Flies is interesting, but there's not a
yeah.
single girl in it. There's not a single girl in it. So if you have a number of books in a row like that, I'm saying, like, where's the girls? That was my experience of high school. It's not the case anymore. I expect it's probably the exact opposite, that all the books on the reading list are all about how girls are oppressed or girl power books. And so the school system is obviously part of the picture. And are the adults in our lives, whether those be grandparents or parents or aunts and uncles or neighbors or our parents' friends, those shape our view of the world. And there's hopefully going to be a diversity of perspectives, but a lot of perspectives that are kind of a couple generations perhaps behind where we'd like them to be on certain issues. So we get all kinds of different, and of course mass media and Hollywood and television and Netflix. And so I think I'm sorry, as I say, I don't have the answer. I think we
It's
just have
okay.
to keep chipping away and challenging what we see. And I'm going to sound like I'm this really flaky granola lefty, which I am not, but it really does come down to being nice to people, being courteous to people, being loving to people, and responding to them as humans rather than as, oh, you're a white male or you're a black female. Just forget those labels, forget those categories. Let's just be decent to each other.
So I'd like to comment real quick about what you just said. You're talking about being a granola lefty. Most of my content is directed toward conservatives. I've interviewed conservatives and Republicans here in the States, and that's the message they give. That's not a granola lefty message. It's we should love each other. We should care for our communities. We should treat each other equally. And
Yes,
so
yes.
I will tell you, though, when I was in the state of Ohio and I was going to run for office as a Democrat, I went to the executive director of the Democratic Party in the county I was in, and I was told there's no room for white males in the Democratic Party.
Oh my God.
So I'm not entirely certain it's the lefties who wants the equality that you mentioned there. So with that in mind, where do we go from here? Like, is it like Jesus said, we just have to get to the children before they grow up, and then like otherwise they're lost? Or do we just have to keep yelling and hoping someone in power decides to hear us, in your opinion?
Um,
I know you don't
well,
have
I
the
don't.
answers. We're just having a
Yes, yes,
conversation.
yes, yes. I think I don't think it's about the people in power hearing us. I think it's about ordinary people in their lives making choices and seeing the humanity in the people around us. I don't think that I don't think the people in power have the ability to snap their fingers and change everything for us. It would be nice if their perspective on the world aligned a little more. Um, but it's not about those in power. It's about, I think, changing attitudes at the grassroots level, and so it is. You know, in the last few years, I've become I have my admiration for Christianity has grown. I was raised myself as a Catholic, and for me, it was not a good experience. And so I have spent much of my life a little bit hostile, more than a little bit hostile sometimes, to organized religion. And the last few years, especially through the COVID experience we've all been through, I have become much. Um, I've become very grateful for Christians because I think whether I believe in God in the same way that they do, the ones who live their faith and who love their neighbor, which is kind of the central message, are we need more of those people. We need them all around us. And some of the work that I'm doing as a journalist right now is about the trucker protests that happened in Canada in early 2022. And one of the things I find myself saying to people is that the churches failed us during COVID, but the Christians showed up.
That's
There were
right.
so many Christians in Ottawa in minus 25°C weather, cooking for people and giving, bringing fuel for the truckers and encouraging people and coming up to a trucker and saying, "Can I pray with you? Can I pray for you? Can I, it was amazing. It was love in action. And so it's very interesting for me personally. My own personal journey is like, yes, yes, more Jesus, more Christianity, more love. And that, that's a very good answer to, where do we go from here? That is a good path to follow. It may not be the only path, but it is definitely a good path.
I love it. I didn't tell you this part that my show is I told you the statistic that got me into it is 80% of suicides are men here in the States. And I told you the reasons that they feel lonely, they feel rejected by society, and they feel they don't have a purpose. And I knew that the only answer to all three of those things was Jesus Christ. And if I could introduce men to Jesus, I might be able to help save their lives. And so that's why I do the show.
Right,
And
right.
and that was completely spontaneous. And look, it all came full circle.
That's right. That's right. And and one of the things that because I've been interviewing a bunch of truckers who went to Ottawa and who dropped their lives and who went there and they thought they were going for a weekend protest and then they
Mm.
ended up there for 3 weeks. And no one was quite prepared for that, but people held their ground. And I've been interviewing, and a bunch of these truckers are Christians as well, a
Mm.
number of them. So, this one guy from Guatemala who's Catholic, and a bunch of guys who are Dutch Reformed, and then a real Mennonites and a real cross section of Christianity, different flavors of Christianity. But when I'm interviewing these truckers and what's their analysis and what was their motivation and where did they find their strength in moments of weariness and despair, I've had to listen very carefully to what they say, and um, I, as I say, they're telling me, look, our church is our community, and when they said we could not go to church during COVID, that was an attack on our community. And when you have a crisis going on in society, you need your spiritual community more, not less.
Right.
So for the government to think it was remotely appropriate to tell people they couldn't go to church for months and months and months, not just a week or two, but months on end. This was an attack on their social support network, right? And so this is, as I say, as a journalist, I like to learn new things. I like to learn something that I don't know and haven't heard before. And so it's been very interesting for me working on this project, because it has become very clear to me that church provides community. It gives us links to other people who are there for us when we're having in times of trouble. And it helps us see that we are dependent on people, other people depend on us, that
That's
it gives us a meaning and purpose and a place to be. So my admiration for organized religion has just gone way up in the last few years. And because as I say, I think it's I think it is the way, and it may not be the only way. I'm not saying there's no other way, but it is a very powerful, time-tested way of being connected to our fellow human beings.
Absolutely. And you said you're always learning. So I don't know if you knew this one. I had a associate professor of psychiatry out of McGill University on the show, and we were talking about the suicide statistic, and he told me that the science shows that individuals with higher religiosity are less likely to commit suicide. And so
yes,
it's right there.
And I believe I've seen some data recently that just says that if you go to church, you are far less likely to be depressed. That your personal happiness level is just, we're dealing with statistics and we're dealing with likelihoods, but you're far more likely to be just a very happy and content person if you go to church on a regular basis. I get that.
That's
I
right.
really get that. I think that is so cool.
It is. All right, Donna, we're getting close to our time. So do you have any final thoughts you want to share before we wrap this up?
I think all of us have to take responsibility for our own lives. It doesn't matter what sex we are. It doesn't matter what religion we are, what culture we come from. We are in charge of our own lives, and we are also responsible for the people around us to some degree. And that I think again, this sounds so banal, but it's just like, no, be nice to other people. Be kind, be courteous, truly.
Blasphemy. I can't do that in polite society. Donna, thank you so much. Oh, go ahead.
Pardon me, sorry. I think one of the things we lost when we stopped going to church as a whole community that did this every Sunday was that we forgot that it's hard to be a good person sometimes. It's hard because, some of us can be lazy sometimes. Some of us are tired. We're distracted, we're stressed. It's hard to be a good person. And church kind of reminded us that on a regular basis, that it was a challenge. And it also reminded us that we're going to fail. Because we're human. We're going to fall short of our own expectations and other people's expectations. That's normal, and we just pick ourselves up and we keep going. But yes, that it needs to be worked at because it's hard and it doesn't come easy.
Perfect.
Sorry.
That's beautiful. All right, Donna, thank you so much. I genuinely appreciate you taking the time to come on and share with us today your knowledge and your history and just sharing this important conversation that no one else seems to want to have. And so it's wonderful finding someone who wants to have it.
Well, thank you so much. I've enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And for everybody else, I'm going to remind you all, keep looking for the light in the tempest. God will show you the way.